While the Vita may not be getting the same kind of support it used to, there are still a ton of great games coming to the console in 2018. To get the word out about some of the system's best upcoming offerings, I've decided to start doing these monthly top 10s, starting with March 2018. This coming month is primed to bring some really interesting games to the system, with one pretty major release. So with all that out of the way, let's kick things off with North. Chances are, you've probably never heard of this one. I'm gonna be honest, prior to making this video, I had no idea this even existed. Basically, North is a puzzle game in which you play as a refugee who is trying to find asylum in a mysterious city, one which is populated by these kinds of unsettling creatures. The game definitely has a sort of Blade Runner vibe with its synth-pop soundtrack and art style, which I'm personally a big fan of when done right. Unlike in games like the Turing Test or Portal, where every new level is built upon the same principles, North's puzzles all supposedly vary in what exactly you're supposed to do, with hints coming in the form of letters the player is writing to his sister. These puzzle games often walk a fine line between addicting and outright boring, but so long as the puzzles are consistently inventive, I have a good feeling about this one. North will launch on March 6th, and will run you about $20 on the PlayStation Store. So this next one might be kind of a cheat considering the game originally launched on the Vita back in 2014, but I'll take any chance I can to talk about Velocity 2X. Specifically, we're talking about the new Critical Mass edition of the game. For the uninitiated, Velocity 2X is a shoot-'em-up puzzle game that alternates between vertical scrolling ship sections and 2D shooter platforming segments. The game reminds me a lot of Celeste in the sense that it's absolutely gorgeous while at the same time being really damn challenging at times. The original Velocity 2X easily ranks among the Vita's greatest hits, and this re-release is basically just that game with all three of the game's expansions and some other goodies as well, such as the making-of documentary and the game's soundtrack. And hey, for fans of physical media, you can even buy this one at retail should you choose. I know that may not seem like a big deal, but for the Vita, that just doesn't happen a whole lot in the US anymore. The Critical Mass Edition comes out on March 20th and will run you back $30 at retail. Next up, we have The Long Reach. This is a 2D horror game set in New Hampshire, which isn't really a setting you see a lot in most games. After a scientific research project goes horribly wrong in the town of Bearvox, what starts off as an adventure game quickly turns into something far more sinister. The game draws a lot of inspiration from games like Lone Survivor, which in my opinion was one of the best horror games to ever come out on the Vita. While the game's pixel art style is pretty common in a lot of indie games these days, the game still looks really good, and the premise definitely has me intrigued. The Long Reach will cost $15 and comes out on March 14th in the US and Europe. Next we have Surprise, another indie game. Specifically, we're talking Midnight Deluxe. It's a 2D platformer in which you take control of a fairy named Midnight, maneuvering your way through 70 levels. While the majority of these are remakes from Midnight 1 and 2, there are also some brand new levels for returning players. The game reminds me a lot of Kick and Fennec, you know that Vita exclusive platformer that came out back in 2015? If, like me, you're into these kinds of platformers, then you can pick up Midnight Deluxe on March 6th. So this is probably where a lot of Western gamers will click away, because our next game is a Japanese visual novel. I realize there's a lot of distaste towards practically anything indie or Japanese from a lot of Vita gamers, but while I can understand where a lot of people are coming from, it's really just the reality of the Vita in 2018 that these are some of the most popular games on the system over in Japan. At number 6, we have Root Double Before Crime After Days Extended Edition. Damn, that's a long title. Believe it or not, this was actually an Xbox 360 game from 2012 that was later re-released on the Vita and PS3 back in 2014. This version of the game was actually the result of a successful Kickstarter campaign. Root Double follows two different playable protagonists, both of which are trying to understand the cause between a massive radiation lake at a nearby power plant. The big gimmick in Root Double is what they're calling the SSS, or Senses Sympathy System. Basically, rather than making clear-cut choices, it's your emotions that drive the story forward. If you're confused, don't worry, I am too. Hopefully someone who's played Root Double in the past can elaborate on how exactly this works. The game launches on March 8th in North America, with a European version not in the pipeline due to licensing constraints. Kicking off the top 5 for the month of March is Super Robot Wars X, which also takes home the award for Best Named Vita Game if you ask me. The latest entry in Bandai Namco's long-running tactical role-playing series, X features crossovers from several different anime, manga, and video game franchises. This is a series that's, with a few exceptions, typically stayed within Japan. In fact, while X is releasing on March 29th in Japan, it won't actually come to the US, with a release in Southeast Asia scheduled for this April. Next up, we have Penny Punching Princess, an isometric brawler in which you play as a princess who's recently been dethroned by the evil Dragonlone family. This game just oozes charm, with its premise and gameplay mechanics revolving entirely around money. Capitalism is at the very heart of this beat-em-up, but thankfully the developer hasn't done this for anything in the way of forced social commentary. As you gather more money, you can begin bribing enemies to fight for you and building traps. The game will set you back $40, which if you ask me seems like a lot, but who knows, maybe it'll prove to be worth it. Penny Punching Princess releases on March 30th in the EU, with a US release scheduled for this April. Kicking off the top 3 for the month of March is, and I hope I'm saying this right, Hakuoki Edo Blossoms. Another visual novel, Edo Blossoms, is the second part of a two-part story, beginning with Kyoto Winds back in 2015. This game is kind of a rarity for two reasons. For one, it's a PS Vita exclusive, which is pretty rare by 2018 standards. Most of the games on this list are also coming to the PS4 and Nintendo Switch. And secondly, it's going to be compatible with the PlayStation TV, should you choose to further neglect your poor Vita. The game will retail at $40 and releases on March 13th in the States and on March 16th in Europe. This month's runner-up for most anticipated game of the month is Code Realized Future Blessings. And yeah, this is basically a relationship simulator. To be fair, the plot is seemingly deeper than that label may make it seem, as it does have somewhat of a supernatural twist. These games really aren't for me personally, but Future Blessings definitely has an audience over in Japan, so I'd be remiss not to include it towards the top of the list. Future Blessings will release on March 30th in the US, with a spring release set for European fans. And finally, at number 1, we have Attack on Titan 2. Yeah, there was really no question that this was going to top the list this month. In hindsight, the first Attack on Titan game was one of the biggest releases on the Vita back in 2016, and I have a feeling we'll be saying the same thing about Attack on Titan 2 a year from now for 2018. This is really one of those cases where a multi-platform game is actually better suited to the Vita than to virtually any other system. While by console standards the game looks a bit dated in my opinion, on the Vita's smaller display it looks outright beautiful, especially if you're still using the OLED display version of the system. With over 30 playable characters planned, more than 3 times the roster of the first game, Attack on Titan 2 is primed to be a pretty damn good sequel. Boasting a robust customization system, lots of interesting NPCs to interact with, and side activities to partake in, I have a feeling fans of the anime are going to have a blast with this one. Oh, and the online modes from the first game are also returning in the form of a 4v4 Annihilation mode. God knows the Vita needs more new competitive multiplayer offerings, so here's hoping Attack on Titan 2 can deliver on that front as well. The game releases on March 15th in Japan, followed by a March 20th release in the US and Europe. Well guys, that's the end of the list. March is set to be a solid month for the Vita, and with one of the system's biggest games of the year coming in the form of Attack on Titan 2. For all things PlayStation Vita in the months to come, feel free to subscribe. Until next time, this has been Fixation.